Okay, this is number 2 on the AP Statistics free response questions for 2025. These are my sample answers of how I would answer the problem if I was taking the exam. So number 2 says, aphids are tiny insects that feed on plants such as cabbage plants. A farmer wants to reduce the number of aphids in a cabbage field. A river is located 100 meters south of a cabbage field. The farmer divides the field into 25 regions of equal size as shown in the diagram. Each region has approximately the same number of cabbage plants. So here we have our diagram of each of the 25 equal sized regions. It's 100 meters from the river. The farmer would like to estimate the proportion of cabbage plants in the field that are affected by aphids and believes that the extent of aphid damage is greater for the regions in the cabbage field closer to the river. This is very important. To obtain the estimate, the farmer is considering 3 sampling methods. Sampling method 1 is we select region 3, which is the closest to the farmer's house and the furthest from the river. Examine every cabbage plant in the region for aphid damage. Sampling method 2 is randomly select one row, A, B, C, D, or E. For every region in the selected row, examine every cabbage plant for aphid damage. And then lastly, sampling 3 says randomly select one region from each of the rows, A, B, C, D, and E. For each selected region, examine every cabbage plant for aphid damage. Okay, so let's look at part A. Part A says, explain whether sampling method 1 is appropriate sampling method for the farmer to use to estimate the proportion of cabbage plants in field that are damaged by aphids. So if I go back up to sampling method 1, it says select region 3. Okay, so region 3 is right here. And it wants us to only take a sample of those cabbages and no other ones in the other 25 plots. Well, remember that the farmer mentions that he believes the damage is greater next to the river. So if we only sample this one portion close to his house, then we aren't getting an appropriate sampling method. We would only be looking at the ones closer to the farmer, which could form a underrepresentation of the entire cabbage field. So how I would write part A, write it off to the side here, is that sampling method 1 is not appropriate sampling method. In this method, we are only looking at the cabbage closest to the farmer's house, which would underrepresent the entire field. Since the farmer believes that the damage is greater near the river, this sampling method would underestimate the damage done by the aphids, the little insects. Okay, so that's how I would answer part A. Let's look at part B. Part B says, using sampling method 2, the farmer randomly selects row E and examines every cabbage plant in row E. If the farmer's belief is correct, determine whether the selection of row E is likely to provide an overestimate or an underestimate of the proportion of cabbage plants in the field that are damaged by aphids. Explain your answer. So sampling method 2, okay, so let me clear this, said that he's only going to take samples in row E. And we noticed that row E is the row of cabbages that is closest to the river, which means we would have an overestimate of the entire field since the farmer believes that the aphids are going to affect the fields of cabbage closest to the river. So this is how I would answer B. Sampling method 2 is more likely to show overestimate of the entire field since it is only sampling the fields closest to the river, which the farmer believes has the greater aphid damage. And then last part, part C, says using the information provided in the diagram of the cabbage field, describe how to implement sampling method 3, which requires a random selection of one region for each of the rows A, B, C, D, and E. So going up here, clear this. We're now answering part C. So since we have all the rows already labeled and we want to randomly select one field within each of the rows, then I would do a random number generator for each of them. So this would be a random number generator for 1 through 5, okay, for part A. And then I would continue that for part B, which would be 6 through 10. And then so on and so forth until I do all the rows. And whatever number is selected is what I would sample. So for example, if 1 through 5 and I randomly generated number 2, then this one would be sampled. And then for row B, if I did a random generator from 6 to 10 and 10 was selected, then this is the one that I would sample. And I would do that all the way to the end, which means I would have 5 samples evenly distributed between the farmer's house and the river, which would give me a better approximation of the proportion of cabbage plants that are affected by these insects. Okay. So this is how I would answer part C. So part C, we would implement sampling method 3 by using a random number generator. We would start with row A and randomly select a number between 1 and 5. And use the corresponding field to take our sample. We would repeat for row B, but use numbers 6 through 10. Row C, but use numbers 11 through 15. Row D, but use numbers 16 through 20. And then lastly, row E, where we would use number 21 through 25. Once we selected all of these, we would then record the percent of crops, so in this case cabbage, affected by